Hello and welcome to season 6, episode 7 of the Dualistic Unity podcast. I am starting this episode. I am, in fact, the start of this episode. And why? I have no idea. I have no idea why. And that has been a big part of my experience lately, has been this void of potential that I sit in from moment to moment to moment. And lately, when I'm speaking, it's like I'm not speaking, but rather I am the experience of speaking that must happen in whatever moment it is happening. It's not that I'm speaking for the sake of being heard, but I'm speaking as a result of what I've become to this moment. And in fact, the speaking is facilitating what I am becoming from moment to moment. And when I say I'm becoming, I don't necessarily just mean Ray, because just as I am the start of this episode, I am the entire episode, listener and speakers combined.
Because there's not even a start or an end to this episode. This episode is an expression of everything that we've ever been through, that we've ever gone through. And by we, I also don't mean Andrew and Ray. These are just expressions of whatever's going on right now. And it's kind of exciting when you realize that. And I am enjoying the ability to take this in whatever direction we would like, moment to moment. Like, dude, it's fucking unreal. After 2 years, I feel like it's just hitting me that, oh, this is just what it is. Like, this can be taken in whichever direction we would like. Having all of these preconceived ideas of what a podcast is, what a conversation is, what a certain flow is, the right thing to do, the right way to do it, how to say it, what structure to have. It's like, fuck all that shit. That's getting in the way in a lot of ways, and cutting down on our ability to just express whatever we are in this moment right now, because you're already doing it. You don't have to think about the right way to do it. And the right way to do it is just a way to avoid or distract yourself from the freedom that could be there when you're willing to let go of that right way to do it. So I appreciate you kicking this episode off, and I am enjoying the ability to do my best to follow up whatever you're saying in whichever direction I would like to take that.
And that's the fun part, because I gave you no warning whatsoever. I'm just like, are you ready to go? And then we started, and you dance with that rather well. And it's because you know there's no right way to respond to the unknown, because it continues to be the unknown once you're responding to it. It's not like, aha, I've responded, now it's the known. If you're convincing yourself that, you're in for a lot of fun surprises. It continues to be the unknown from moment to moment to moment. And that is really, I think, what we're getting across. We were talking about it today in the episode of Raw, that if your focus is not on control, if your focus is not on the future, it's not on how you perceive yourself, it's not on how others perceive yourself, it's not about that attempt to achieve more value, that attempt to accumulate more so you become more. If it's not about that, then it's about this moment and your response to this moment. And this moment is uncertainty, and thus potential, because they mean the same thing. And living in this moment, you are left with two options. As we've said, relax or panic. But if you relax, what you're doing is you are contradicting, just by virtue of the mentality you're in, the entire world that is based on the attempt to control. And that's all you have to do. And that's why every time we have this sensation that we should be out there saving the world, we are actually perpetuating the world as it is right now, because that comes from a place of control, a place of identity, a place of arrogance. There's a lot there, a lot of assumption about what saving means, about who you are, about how you're going to save it, as opposed to just being the world. which means surrendering control and focusing on your response to who and what you are right now.
When that becomes your priority, everything else does kind of fall away quite a bit. And there's this sort of, I don't know if it's attentiveness, focus, whatever you want to call it. It's like there's less even of a consideration of trying to hold on to something. And don't get me wrong, I try and hold on to shit all the fucking time and will grasp for that sense of control from time to time. But when you're in it, when you are relaxed, the thought of trying to then control it just isn't at the forefront. Sorry, so much anymore. And yeah, who the fuck am I apologizing to? Ray, I guess the listener. I don't know. Yeah, I burped. It happens. I'm drinking
okay
some
with it.
carbonated stuff. Yeah, cool. So it starts to fall away. And so in a world, the burp in the way of the point, which I didn't really have anyway. And that's kind of the other incredible thing, because we were reflecting on this earlier today, or at least I was in our Twitch stream, about how there was a point in my life where I wouldn't have been able to go into a situation without a plan, without some preconceived idea of what it was going to be, how it was going to go. But with that comes an expectation, a right way for it to go, a wrong way for it to go, the hope that the right way happens, the fear that the wrong way happens. And so I always thought it was just, all right, just keep making sure you do the right thing. Just keep doing that, and then you're good. Then you keep going, then you keep progressing, and then you keep building, and then you keep becoming more and more and more and more and more. It's like, and then what? You're the most relative to what? Just your assumption. And so that comes with that, though. Oh, just avoid doing the wrong thing and keep doing the right thing. And I never even considered that there might be another option, which is fuck both of those. Like, maybe there isn't a right or a wrong. Maybe all I have is this spot that I'm in right now and making the most of this. But this comes from me. This isn't coming from my preparation. It isn't coming from my ideas, and it isn't coming from my assumptions. So, if you want to hop on an episode with no idea what you're going to do, pop a couple gummies beforehand, smoke a little weed, and just see what happens, see how it goes, because there isn't a right way. You're not going to be able to figure out how it's going to be received, how someone's going to hear it, or what state of mind they're going to be in when they listen to it or resonate with it. And all of my assumptions always came from just my own ideas of how I would hear it if I was listening to it, what I want to hear. But then it's like, it's jumping ahead of the situation to try and be the thing that I assume I should be, as opposed to just allowing it to happen. And that's very far from prioritizing my experience here and now. And like the ability to do that and just relax and just realize that if there is no right or wrong way, I might as well just step into it. I might as well just see what is expressed right now. And there's so much less weight, there's very little pressure in that. But it's not about getting to a point like I always assumed. It was just keep doing the right thing, just get really good at doing the right thing. And then what? You just have to keep doing the right thing forever.
It sounds exhausting. It also sounds like you could fuck up at any point, and so it sounds terrifying. And I think that's the point, is it's the mentality that there is a right thing that creates the ongoing stress that eventually contributes to somebody doing what would be otherwise obviously an act of cruelty or ignorance. And what I mean is simply the fact that when you are thinking about what the right and wrong thing to do is, and thus thinking about yourself and others by virtue of thinking about yourself, whether or not they're doing the right thing, whether or not you're doing the right thing, that whole world of comparison and judgment and all that fun stuff, as soon as you're in that, you're just frankly not thinking about how other people are feeling. You're thinking about whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And so there is immediately less empathy, but there is more of a sense of control. And that's what's so terrifying. We have somebody right now that we're talking to who every time we have the conversation about responsibility, they just keep asking, but what's the right thing? Tell me the right thing. What do I do now? It's like, well, live. And that's it. Just be here and stop judging your progress. But they can't understand that. They won't currently understand how that makes sense because they're not doing it. They want to have that sense of control. And the alternative is sensitivity, which is an entirely different way of experiencing things. It's like the difference between swimming out into the ocean versus floating and feeling the waves before you decide which direction you're going to go. Like if you were lost in the ocean with no sight of land, the only thing you could really do would be try to feel the currents, right? Try to figure out where you're going, right? If you were to just paddle out into nowhere, let's just say you're not swimming. Let's just say you're in a boat. So you have more time and you're not just going to drown. Let's take the stakes out of this. Okay. What I'm saying is that you're on the ocean, you have no sense of direction of where you're going to go. Just to feel like you know where you're going, you could just keep paddling in a direction and get fucked up by the currents. Because regardless of what direction you think you're going, the currents are going to mess with you. Or you could actually try and get some wherewithal of the current system and the direction, or in the different directions around you, and then try to make a decision. Right? But then at least you're being informed by the currents, not only by the currents, but by the weather, because that's messing with you too. But if you were to just go, I need to be doing something, I need to go somewhere, I need to find the right way, you're not in a state of mind where you can consider all of the considerations around you, where you can consider the environment. And more importantly, in the case of not being on the ocean, but actually being surrounded by people, you can't consider other people. And so I always find it really interesting because when we say you have to let go of this idea that there's a right and a wrong, immediately people are like, well, what about evil people? What about people who hurt others? How do you think they got that way? How do you think they became so lost in themselves and the idea of themselves and the justification of what they have to do that they're able to hurt people through a lifetime of believing in right and wrong? And I'll say straight up, a big part of that was Catholicism, Christianity, and not just Christianity, but religion as a whole. It reinforces this idea that there is a right and a wrong. And you would say, well, yeah, no, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, it does. And there's a God's way versus a way that's not God's. Right? It immediately creates this dichotomy instead of just live. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those. Like what you're talking to is yourself. And it's like, all right, let's just face today and forgive people as they come across me, because I'm sure they're going to forgive me. If just let shit go. Like if you look at it as a self-dialogue and remove the whole aspect of God as something that's watching over you and saying you got to do it this way, then all you're really looking at is the revelation that you're connected to everything. And how you treat yourself is how you treat others. But it's not as simple as how you treat yourself. Buy yourself some flowers because I'd like that. It's not that. It really just comes down to, I guess, the more intimate connection with yourself. Like if you could imagine holding somebody that you love, hugging them close. Now imagine being disconnected in your head, somewhere else, possibly resenting yourself, judging yourself, thinking about something else. And you're still holding them, but you can't really feel them. And that's our relationship with everyone, whether we realize it or not, because we are all connected all the time. So when we are distracted by control and what it means about us, it's harder for us to feel everyone else. But it's uncomfortable, just as it is uncomfortable when we are used to pushing people away to have somebody come and give us a hug. It requires us to let go of some habitual tendencies that were really only meant to protect us, but to protect us from something that was never a danger.
Because the danger is only an assumption when it's a thought, when it's an idea, right? The sensitivity cuts down on those assumptions. And it kind of makes me think with the sensitivity and the ocean example, going back out of the boat, back into the risky swimming around the waters, the floating versus the paddling and flailing. It's very much, similar to your example with holding someone. It's like you can hold someone with a bunch of thick layers of clothes on, not going to feel them as closely as, I guess, the other side of that is being naked and holding them. So, careful with that. But at the same time, like, I don't know. Clothes are made up anyway. Anyway, that was not where I was going to take that.
Well, I mean, it works. It's funny how that immediately you're like, hold on, you're holding them naked. Before we had clothes, that's how everything holds one another. I mean, that's how all animals hold each other. And there's not this weird sexual thing that happens, but immediately in our culture, there kind of is. And why? Well, because we think about ourselves so very much. And this is something that we've talked about, especially with Jackie and Amanda and their experience with men. And it's not just their experience with men, but also our experience with women to a large degree. It's difficult to just be with somebody of the opposite sex or the same sex, however, whatever your preferences might be, and just be yourself when so very often that other person is driven by need, or the need for control, or the need to identify, or the need to have certainty. And so it makes it very difficult to have a kind of relationship, or to be naked, as it were, with that person. Because it is exactly like that. It is exactly like being naked with one another. And you know this from being at the retreat. When you're at the retreat, you're not holding up any kind of a shield. Everybody is wearing clothing. I just want to make that very clear. But there is no sense of a mask. Or at the very least, there is always the opportunity and the intention of surrendering more and more of that habitual mask. Because it is like being naked with other people. Being in the world, in the moment, not thinking about yourself, is very much like being naked in the world. Because you're not trying to protect yourself from perception. You're not trying to block off people's judgments. You're not in danger from any of those illusions. And so you're not thinking about it.
And with the hesitation to discuss, being naked together, whatever, and just made me think about our prioritization of sex and how interesting it is, because we can think of that as like, oh, it's sexual, whatever, it's in its own category, but really it's just like an orgasm is just extreme relaxation, right? And so because we don't prioritize relaxing in our lives, this situation in which we see as the epitome of relaxation is like this massive prize. Like it drives so much of a lot of the world that is very stressed out, because it's the only way out of that stress and tension. And as you hold it very highly, it creates more stress and tension of trying to get it, like doing things, even like having a certain job that makes you a certain amount of money so that certain people like you, so you get more sex, basically. But we don't, I never really in my life, until we started chatting, equated, like something like that to a state of relaxation, or that extreme, or understood how they tie in to each other. And so it makes sense in a very, very tense world that would be, the ultimate thing. The peak experience is an orgasm, basically. So we get addicted to it. We become obsessed with it. We try and get it at any means necessary. People will pay for it, or do all sorts of things, change themselves, be something else, try and be something for someone else. All these tension creating things that then cause us to, to try and get the thing that's going to relax us, as opposed to just like chilling the fuck out for a second, recognizing that that's what we're striving for in that. Everything's symbolic. So that is just symbolic of being really relaxed. We think, it just feels so good though. It's like, have you ever been relaxed for a little while? Like, that shit feels pretty nice. Like when you're willing to do it. I don't know if it's necessarily like, like fucking orgasming for 10 minutes straight, but yeah, I can't necessarily say that one way or another. In different ways, it's more functional. You can do stuff while you're relaxed. I'm enjoying this tangent a lot. But anyway, it's interesting how we, in that, like, just cutting down the actions, the things, it's like tension to relaxation. Where are we at on that spectrum as a world, as a society? The more we are generally tense, the more value we're going to give the things that do the relaxation for us. So we see things like sex being a huge priority, alcohol, something else that does it for you, as opposed to things that maybe are you're more involved, like your state of relaxation has impact over it. Something like cannabis, where your state of relaxation has influence over the experience, not just the thing doing it for you, because then the things that do it for you cause all sorts of other merry hell. You prioritize it without any sensitivity, whether it's booze, you get hammered and black out, and then the next day it's like you're hungover as shit. Like, that's the balance of the experience. You hook up with someone and like are really just all gung-ho on relaxing and don't even consider taking any precautions whatsoever. All of a sudden you have a fucking child on the way or something. Like, there are then ramifications to striving towards that relaxation that then have the potential to add more tension, and so it's this interesting back and forth of prioritization. But as you just come back to prioritizing in it the relaxation in your own life, in your experience, then maybe those things aren't as necessary all the time. Are they fun from time to time? Yeah, sure. I'm not going to say that they're not. But when you start prioritizing relaxation in your own life, the perspectives on what you're trying to get to or where you're trying to go completely shift and change. And there aren't so many things that you're trying to get to. And then that deepens your state of relaxation just a little bit more.
Oh, that was a good point. Absolutely. And it really just changes the entire focus of things when you break it down to the fact that we are primarily driven towards moments where we feel like we can be ourselves and relaxed. Right. But on the other end of the spectrum, our ability to appreciate the thing that we're doing to relax is going to be diminished by how much we are dependent on it to relax us. So the more you are striving to get to sex and finally orgasm, the less you are going to enjoy the act itself. The more you are going to be hurried towards that end result, the less sensitive you are ultimately going to be. And then what's worse, and I know this from dealing with clients in my life coaching business, the more tension there is about achieving not just sex, but of course, orgasm, and not just for you, but for your partner as well, can weigh so heavily that it leads to sexual dysfunction. And it's just because all of a sudden it means something. It is a path to a feeling or a path to a perception of oneself rather than relaxation being the underlying focus in your life as a whole. So, whatever the tool is, whether it's sex or alcohol or drugs or anything, the more you're doing it as a need to relax, the less it's going to help. Until eventually you're doing it to an unhealthy degree and you're not appreciating it or enjoying it at all.
And that's when it's a need. And it's almost like the baseline. Sorry. Again, not sorry. I'm not sorry I burped. Yeah, fucking first man, get in my train of thought. And then yeah, baseline. So then as it becomes a need, it's not so much a amplification of the relaxation, but it's like getting you back to base experience. Like, your experience sucks until that point, and then it's like, okay, I can chill for a sec. Oh, and it's gone. Oh, fuck. And then you come tumbling back down. But when you're prioritizing, which isn't I mean, it's something that just happens here and now, but at the same time, it's like something you work on, sort of, not really, but it's something that can be prioritized above other things. And it takes the willingness to let go of that sense of control and certainty and all of that stuff, because it's very, very difficult to maintain much degree of relaxation when you're trying to be sure and certain of things. But when that is your base, more so the relaxation, then there isn't so much need for things to go a certain way, like for you to have a bunch of sex or drink a bunch of booze. But then there's so much more of an enjoyable experience if you are having sex, for example, and you're relaxed already. Holy fuck. You're gonna be like, what is this new thing? I haven't been doing this. I was like fucking hoping for this day. Just I don't know what you're gonna do, but who am I to say? But and then it's with booze, it's like maybe you have 2-3 beers and you're feeling like you may be used to on 10 beers, but you're actually functional. You're not gone. You're still there, just like a little bit different when you're willing to do most of the work on your own. And then everything has the opportunity to be like that, just an amplification of that relaxation. I've even been thinking today about, like a podcast or an interview that I'm a guest on or something, just certain situations. The last few months, like the thought of even less so with guests on podcasts, but like doing an interview or something, it was like freaking me out. I was like, oh, I hope it goes well. Like, I hope I do a good job on it. But even just today, like I was talking on Twitch a little bit earlier, kind of it's similar to the backwards law, I guess. Like the more you're trying to do something in a certain way, the less likely it is to happen. The less you're trying to do it in a certain way, the more likely it is to happen. So like I was kind of shifting my perspective on everything of just like I've been trying to do things well or do things correctly. Like, oh, I hope and this is just things I'm going through in my head. It didn't actually I didn't actually have like an interview today or anything. But instead of thinking I hope the interview goes well, thinking like just having the thought of like I hope it goes poorly. I hope this is the worst interview I ever do. Cause then and then you're relaxed. Like when you do immediately, like as soon as I think that, no, I hope this goes poorly. I hope I make an absolute fool of myself. Because then you're relaxed. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be, the worst interview ever, but your willingness for it to be that kind of resets that baseline almost. Because if you're hoping it goes well, it's like it's above you, you're striving for it. If you're hoping it goes poorly, you're already there. It's like, all right, I just have to show up and then just whatever happens, happens. And that's exactly it. That's always the case. So you don't have to necessarily purposely try and do a bad job, but if you're willing to allow it to happen, then you're just there. Then you're just yourself. Then you're fucking relaxed. And then you just see what happens. But otherwise, there's this intention, there's this striving, there's this need for things to happen. It goes hand in hand with already being relaxed. It's like that insight didn't hit me until I relaxed a little bit, or that realization or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Like I had to be relaxed to even realize that that was a potential option, because once you're relaxed, like you don't need as much. It's not looking around, running around like what's going to relax me? What's going to relax me? And, so anyway.
Well said. Exactly. It's so funny because to me, it's very much like if you were to visualize, say, a journey, you are in the forest and there are trails like go in all kinds of different directions. Now, there is no actual purpose to you being in the forest other than that's just your life. You're in the forest. But if you were to all of a sudden go, well, I need to get somewhere. I need to get somewhere. Then you would pick a trail and you would go down that trail trying to get somewhere. But the more you were trying to get to a specific place, the more every time you were coming up to, say, an intersection, you'd get excited, like, oh my God, I'm getting to something. Okay, I gotta make the right choice. Which direction do I have to go? And at the same time, every intersection would be kind of disappointing because it's not the place that you're trying to get to. And so you have this attitude about wandering through the forest based on this fictional end destination that doesn't have to exist. You could actually just get really familiar with the forest and walk around and enjoy each and every moment and slow down. And the best part about slowing down and relaxing, as Andrew was saying, is the fact that you take in more information. When you are running through the forest, you're taking in very little about what's happening around you. When we were in the Netherlands, there was a self-made hut that was built in the forest off of the road. And a lot of people had wandered by and hadn't seen it at all, whereas other people who were walking more slowly, who weren't as lost in their head, noticed it immediately. How many things are we missing because we're lost in our heads or because we're trying to get somewhere, which is basically the same thing? How many things? And all of those things are additional considerations. And all of those additional considerations have to be taken in without getting spooked, because otherwise you're taking in more information than you're running back down another fucking path, rather than taking in more and more and more information. This is why I respect people who can actually survive in the forest to a way better capacity than I ever could. People who understand animal sign, people who understand which mushrooms to eat, people who understand what kind of vegetation is food, what kind of vegetation is poison, and what kind of vegetation is medicine. Because that all comes from just spending a lot of time in the forest, in that environment. It's not dashing about trying to try everything out in different ways, because it would take you forever to try everything out. You have to just take in the information, observe, and go, that's interesting, and then go and look up information about it and try to fulfill more of your understanding, right? But unless you're looking at what you're doing, like mushrooms are a perfect example. You can get two mushrooms that look identical, but if you don't do a spore print, if you don't know enough to do a print of what's underneath the mushroom, you can't tell that they are actually two different mushrooms, and one will kill you while the other one is edible. And so if you're in a rush, I got to eat, you will likely eat something that's poisonous for you. This is why when you're in the forest, one of the first things they tell you is, if you don't know what to eat, whatever you do eat as little of it as possible and wait to see if it makes you throw up. Because that's how you would figure out what to eat, is through calm patience. But if you're always running through the forest going, there's got to be a kitchen somewhere, and there isn't, then eventually you're just going to starve, or you're going to suffer for it. And all because you were just running around trying to find this fictitious kitchen rather than understanding the environment and learning how to feed from it.
That's really symbolic of kind of everything we do in life. Like so many of the things, the expressions of different, illnesses or things that maybe cause illness are from running around. And as you were saying that, I was imagining someone like running around the forest versus walking around, and what they would see, peripherally, say it would be a blur versus clarity. So like as you're running, the faster you run, the blurrier it gets, the more you think you need to get somewhere else, despite never actually being anywhere else. It's just how blurry is your experience versus how clear is your experience. How much are you taking in versus how little you're taking in, to the point that it's basically nothing. Like you're basically not taking anything in whatsoever. And yet you're running, you're trying to be something, and yet you're hoping that you take things in. It's like, yeah, it's really hard to do both. It's almost impossible to take in those surroundings. And so it necessitates, and it's interesting how nature, something like mushrooms, just how beautiful of an example that is. Like they look the same. Like if you're rushed, you're fucked. Like you're probably going to get sick or die or something, just from not taking the time, just from not taking the extra little bit to figure that out. And so what I was saying with the expressions on everything that we do, you think about someone rushing around trying to escape or trying to get to, and like just with food, for example, obesity is very much like someone this isn't necessarily a simple example, because I'm like, oh yeah, but it's like, oh, hold up there, buddy, because there's lots of different reasons for it. But like so much of what we consume or what we take in, like we don't even feel it necessarily. Like we almost rush through, or we have the potential to rush through eating food so much. Oh, this is one way direction to take us. All right, cool. With something like fullness, that it takes what, 30 minutes after you take a bite of something to feel that thing, like the fullness from that. And so, how long does it take to eat a meal? It depends how slow you eat, but maybe around 30 minutes. So, like, you're not even going to feel the entirety of that meal for another 30 minutes. And so, if you're rushing through it, if you're rushing through a meal in, say, 5 minutes, and then you want to be full and you don't want to feel the hunger anymore, it's like either you could keep eating until the 30 minutes are up, or you could chill the fuck out and let it sit in. And so either you're doing something the whole time, or you're chilling out, or you're just slowing the fuck down the whole time and actually enjoying and appreciating the meal, and then filling up the whole 30 minutes with the meal and actually fucking tasting the food. Because that's something too, is when we're striving to be something, doing something for the sake of something else, it's like eating food for the sake of feeling full, getting rid of my hunger, as opposed to eating food to taste it. And so when you prioritize tasting it, it forces you to slow down to taste it. And then you're full in the same amount of time, or you're actually enjoying and appreciating the meal as you go. And it isn't causing you to gain weight and then have to do something else like exercise a bunch in order to mitigate your lack of willingness to just slow down with each bite. Like, if you prioritize that, you don't then have to do all of the things to counteract your unwillingness to just slow down and appreciate the flavor.
It's so funny because I know we've talked about this previously, but it really just comes down to the same old thing we've been hearing our whole life. Slow down, relax, be yourself, pay attention. And that's it. And it's just so gloriously unsatisfying because it doesn't give us any sense of control. It doesn't give us any sense of what's going to come. And so our mind is like, well, how can I relax if I don't know that I'm going to be in control? If I don't know what's going to happen, if I don't know what the end result is going to be, and that I don't know if it's going to be up to my standards, how can I relax in the face of uncertainty? And the answer is ultimately just to accept that there is nothing but uncertainty. Like, now you have no choice. It's like, it's going to happen whether you like it or not. What's your response to something that you have no control over? Right? But it's the acceptance that you have no control, that there will always be uncertainty. And I know people will say, well, no, but you can be certain about certain things. It's like, yeah, but only to a limited degree. Like in our movie review of Kung Fu Panda, right? The red panda, Shifu, was saying, well, I have certainty, I have control. If I plant this seed I can decide where I plant this seed in the ground. And Uguay was saying, right, but it doesn't matter what you want it to be, it's going to be what it is. It's going to be a peach tree. You could want an apple tree or an orange tree or anything like that. It's going to be a peach tree because that's what it is. You don't have total control. And that's something that humanity really has a problem with because we're so fucking clever. It's so very easy for us to have a sense of control, but only in short-sightedness. Like, for example, currently we're thinking about electric cars. The latest rage is electric cars. Electric cars are going to save us. Electric cars are going to change the world. Electric cars, electric cars, electric cars. Nobody's talking about the mining process that goes into the batteries that electric cars run on, or any of the runoff from that, any of the toxicity that's created by that process. Because again, we don't really want to. And it's not that nobody's talking about it. It is something that is being brought up by a lot of people. It's just something that's being ignored because, frankly, it's an uncomfortable truth. And we really don't like those. We just want somebody to say it's going to be okay. And then when somebody comes over and goes, yeah, but what about this? We go, shut up. And it's because we want to be able to come to a point where we feel better about something. And that can become a driving need, especially when you're lost in the forest. until you recognize the only reason you feel lost is because you don't recognize that you belong in the forest. You're trying to get somewhere, but everywhere you go is a part of what you are. So there's no rush because you have your entire existence to explore the forest and yourself as part of it. But if you are under the impression that it means something about you, how you go through the forest, where you go in the forest, and what you do while you're there, then you're never going to enjoy the forest because you're never actually going to connect with it. And thus, any path you take is going to suck. It's going to either be hurried or it's going to be hesitant because you are thinking about it in terms of getting somewhere rather than being where you are and experiencing yourself from moment to moment to moment. I have no idea how we got into the forest analogy. I'm just glad that we got there. This episode should be called Sex and Forests.
I fucking love it. I was thinking, like, this has been fun bouncing, and this is not us ending the episode, by the way. It's just us, like, almost checking back in. I feel like we were fucking locked in, just like bouncing through different things. Like, oh, whatever we were talking about before sex. Oh, sex. Oh yeah, ocean, sex, this, that. Just like, and to think how little I had was thinking about beforehand. I was like, oh fuck yeah, we covered some good shit. That's interesting. I've never thought about something like that. And oh my gosh, that's the beauty in being willing to let go of control, because control is known. You know, what you can control is only what you know. You don't even know what you're capable of. You don't even know what things you may come up with. You don't know what analogies are going to come out of your mouth. And we make the assumption that we do, that we know what we know. There's a lot of shit in there. There's so much more shit in there than you may realize. And you're because it's like we've been taking in information our entire life. The whole time we're running through the forest, we're still taking in, maybe to a bit of a lesser degree, but probably to a much more of a degree than we realize, even as we're running through things. And so you don't even know until you slow the fuck down and stop trying to control and stop trying to be certain and stop trying to look ahead what you are capable of. And then you start making assumptions based on what you're capable of when you're running. It's like you're sprinting and trying to, like, you know, do a fucking Sudoku thing as you're running. It's like your capabilities of doing that while you're running, trying to not run into trees, are going to be way less because you're running. But you slow down, you settle down, take a deep breath, maybe sit down. Like, there's way less going on. All of a sudden, you can focus a little bit more of that attention on the Sudoku or, you know, book or anything that you're doing. But it's like we're trying to, if we're trying to read a book, it's like I'm trying to read a book while I'm sprinting through the forest. It's going to be harder to read the book. No shit. That's like reading a book for a purpose, reading a book for a reason, reading a book trying to get you somewhere or become something or do what I did for a very long time. Is why the fuck would I read a book when I can just listen to the audiobook and go walk a few miles? Like, walking would be better. And it's like, you know, it's the same as and this is more literal, I guess, as trying to walk and read. It's like, or you can settle down and just do it, because our attention's being split in so many different ways at all time. And sure, there's times to split that attention and cut it down into tenths or whatever. I'm not saying that. It's like we're very capable beings, but there is a certain degree of it with which you have at your disposal. And it's almost, I feel like, on a fuck, what's the word? Starts with an E. It's like when a curve goes up like
Ellipse?
no, it's
No.
like it builds on itself, like it goes from 10 to 100 to 1,000
Exponential.
to exponential. Yeah. So it's almost like that attention is exponential in a sense. Like 10% to 50% isn't going to be as big of a jump as 50% to 100%. Well, literally, because it's 40 versus 50. That's not what I meant. If it was equal, those jumps early on versus those jumps to all that attention being focused, it's like that opens up a whole world of potentials because you are entirely focused on where you're at. And the beauty, the crazy thing is we're so capable that we're still like taking in all the information of everything that's going on as we're doing that. But it's like we're more capable of doing things and taking in more information as we go. And I have felt, at least in my life, that it is very much exponential. And the more I split into, walking and reading at the same time versus just sitting down to read, there is that potential to take in so much more and really get the most out of each and every experience. And what the fuck else is this about than making the most of your experience right now?
Which is always a balance. It's funny because we're talking about the forest and the difference between just being in the forest versus trying to get somewhere. And that's lovely. But on the other hand, your job, your work, paying your bills, paying your rent, doing all that feels like you're very much going in a direction, trying to get somewhere. And if you don't accept that, that's just going to be the cycle that exists until you find a way, if you want to find a way, to not necessarily live in that cycle, to find a way out of that cycle. But otherwise, it's just a cycle. There will always be cycles of inconveniences and all of that other fun stuff. Where the fuck was I going with this? Shit, what did you just say before this?
Sorry, I just taking this. Hold on. The fuck,
Yeah,
just
no, I'm
like,
good. I'm good.
all right.
Okay. So keeping that in mind, where I'm going with this is essentially that if you have to make a decision like, well, I'd like to take a walk, but I'd also like to read a book, you're making a decision, but you have to find balance in that. Like a lot of times we take a walk because we want to maintain our health. Well, there's a lot of things to consider in terms of your health. It's not just taking a walk. Sometimes it's stretching your mind. Sometimes it's expanding your mind. Sometimes it's exercising your imagination, giving yourself a moment's quiet. So, right there, maybe you have to make a trade. Maybe instead of going for an hour's walk, you go for a half-hour walk and you take a half hour to read. The point is, it's not about getting somewhere, it's about fulfilling yourself moment by moment by moment. And there is no right way to do that. You're always going to be trading something. Because if you're out having fun, then you're trading that time for something that you could have been doing productively. If you're being productive, then you're trading that time for something that you could have been doing that's fun. That's an overly simplistic example. The point is that you can't do all of it all the time. And so sometimes it's worth it just to read, especially if you're resistant to reading, especially if you're resistant to slowing down, because that's ultimately what being resistant to reading is. It's being resistant to just slowing down and letting things happen at the pace that they are going to happen. And this is why people tend to skim. It's because they're really trying to get through to get to the end. And that ruins so much of the story, because you'll find in what you're reading, the more you get into it, the more you allow it to unfold, the more your brain gives you more in terms of scene and scenery and context and voices and depth. Because as with everything, what you put your attention into grows. It's just like anything else. So if you're putting your attention into yourself, you will always grow. Whereas if you are putting your attention into some fictitious end result where you are more, then it's going to hinder your growth.
And it's interesting on that point because today I felt a little more relaxed than I have maybe last couple of days. And my day kicked off with me having an alarm set. And the last couple of days, I've snoozed that bitch a couple times. And today, not that this like makes or breaks my day necessarily, but today I was like, really, really wanted to do it. And I was like, I really want to do this. Let's do something other than the thing that I really, really, really want to do right now. And it sort of snowballed because it was like, I don't have to take that as seriously, that perspective of what I want or don't want to happen. Because then I just relax a little bit more almost immediately. And so it's funny with the reading, dude, because it's just called me out so hard because and so many people too. I'm not saying that. I'm alone in not wanting to read as much, but like fuck, I was saying on Patreon before, like I don't think I've read a full book, like sat down, turned the pages, like non-audio book, none of that shit in like 10 years. like minimum, like it might be more than that, just because it was like I anytime I did, like, it's not to say I haven't quote unquote read books, but they've all been audiobooks past, because of course you can do those things. But then fucking walking, like I have actually gotten into running recently and do enjoy it, but like have not been, and it's funny with that too, because like in the past I would have been trying to be the fastest person in the world. Basically, like I wouldn't be able to do it without setting goals and doing things. And I just do it to enjoy it. It's something that I've noticed things in my body, imbalances, whatever. I get high most of the time. It's a fun time. And but I go pretty slow. Like I enjoy the run. Like maybe I can see a little bit more of a city that I'm visiting if I jog it. And again, it's like that literally is running through the forest versus not, but it's shifting experiences. So anyway, not really exactly the point I was going for, but with walking, and I used to walk a lot and like spend a lot of my day walking, which I love doing and I still love doing it. It's not to say that I don't still do that, but it was partially to, maintain weight in a certain way, or it was for that purpose in a lot of ways. Like, oh, I can get 10 miles in, that's about 1,000 calories. And therefore, if my BMR is 1,900 calories, then that means I can eat 2,900. And then I want to maximize that because I want to maximize my fullness. And so I'm eating high volume foods and blah, 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 blah. Instead of just slowing the fuck down and tasting the things that I'm eating and being involved when I'm eating the food. Because, like, for me, it was a lot of eat a lot, exercise a lot, eat a lot, exercise a lot, as opposed to just slowing down and not having to eat as much. And I got to tell you, like, the last couple weeks, and partially to do with our conversation about sugar being a drug, I'm like, yeah, that's probably close to as big of an addiction as thinking about myself has been throughout a lot of my life. But shifting to that perspective, like, oh yeah, it is the drug. Like, it is a substance that then causes you to, it gives you that instant gratification that then you feel more shitty for later on. But so anyway, I've been eating less, like, because I am eating more slowly. I'm actually feeling things. I have just more energy in general. There isn't the thought of like, how much have I eaten? Like, I was very much, I for a few months in a row, I tracked calories like a few years ago, and then I always kind of kept it in mind to some degree. And like more recently, I haven't been, and it's just been enjoying the meals, whatever I'm eating, just like really getting into the fucking flavor. And it all has to do, I know I've said this, like, I think I've used this in like 3 examples today, like flavors and food and eating and slowing down, but it is a decent chunk of our day, and it just is slowing down. Like, that's all it is. And so many of the things we do are products of rushing around and the time that we spend doing things, like I eat a bunch, so then I got to exercise a bunch, or I could eat a little less, exercise a little bit less, and then have more time to do other shit. And all of a sudden, your life feels like it's getting stretched out because you're able to focus on other things as well without passing off on the thing that was the reason for the thing previously. Like, the walking was very much to counteract a bunch of eating stuff. Did I enjoy it? Sure. But if I just look at where it's coming from and see, oh, or I could just slow the fuck down there and then don't have to do as much of that. So many of the things that we spend our time doing are products of not initially slowing down in another situation. And so if we just look at, in general, slowing down, like, we'll have more time for other things, not the least of which being actually being able to enjoy and appreciate our life, or doing some things you like to do throughout the day instead of having no fucking time to do anything you actually enjoy.
It's so interesting because we were talking about eating and taste, and so why not? Let's go down that road. Um, you're supposed to chew 32 to 50 times every mouthful, depending on what you're eating, right? Like, for everything, it's like 32 to 35 times. And then for things that are harder, it's supposed to be like 40 to 50 for like meats and stuff like that. And how often do we do that? How often do you chew 32 to 50 times ever, let alone ongoingly? Like maybe once in a while, like, yeah, and you count it to prove to yourself that you're doing it, right? But then the next day, when you're in a rush to get to work, you're just gobbling that down pelican style. It's just going straight down the gullet. And it's just because you're in a rush and you got to get that shit in your stomach. But how much of that contributes to our ongoing health problems or even obesity? Because your body has to break that shit down. The whole point of chewing, the whole point of going through it, not just, of course, the experience of flavor, but also the experience of allowing your digestive system to go through that shit easily. So that way it can absorb the nutrients that it's supposed to and get rid of what it doesn't need. And yet you're sending down whole chunks of stewing beef and your body is just churning away at it, trying to take it in. And it's probably not doing it well. And then, of course, because your body's not doing it well, you want to take in more food and you're just shoveling it down. And so your body's constantly going through this backed up process of just trying to get it out. So it's doing exactly what you're doing, just trying to get through rather than taking its time to really take in the nutrients, to take in the experience, to take in the time. And it's funny because I know I had heard this when I was 6, 7 years old by my grandfather. You're supposed to chew up to like 30 times. And even back then, he looked at me and admitted, I don't do it, but you're supposed to. And so it's really important to recognize that while we can idealize prancing through the forest at a leisurely pace, it is also true that occasionally we will become afraid of the darker shadows behind us in the forest, or we will suddenly become enamored with the idea that somewhere in the forest is better than anywhere else, that we stop being who we are at that place and become someone else entirely. Once I'm there, I won't deal with all this shit. It's always going to be the same forest. It's always going to be you in the forest, right? And so it's important to remember that you can idealize how simple this is, but you can recognize it's not. This is an ongoing habit. The knee-jerk tendency to assume control or to assume that thought's going to help us or to assume that something is better, the knee-jerk tendency to think is not something that we're going to get over all in one go. I don't think it's something that we actually have to get over so much as just understand. Because at least if we're understanding it, we're questioning it as we're making that knee-jerk reaction, which changes it entirely, right? Very much in the same way that we were talking about being aware of your tension, accepting your tension is how you relax, whereas trying to relax is very stressful.
Well said. And so it very much is almost like we are in that forest in a spotlight in a sense, but like not a small spotlight, like a decent sized spotlight, or at least this is the imagery I was getting as you were talking, and everything else is kind of dark. And so our world, society, reality, whatever you want to call it, is all the things going on in the light, the things we can see telling us where to go next. But like there's not a path out of that spot. There isn't a set direction. There's just guesses. They're like, no, that way. And it's just as much darkness no matter where you look, all over. And there's people telling you there's things going on in the situation, things you're seeing, which again are just assumptions. So I don't even know. Maybe it is just a spotlight on you running around and the only thing that you know with an ability to, there we go. All right. I was like, I have no fucking idea where I'm going to take this next. But and so with the ability as you slow down to adjust to the darkness a little bit. We've talked about this before previously, but in this example specifically, when that spotlight's there, you can still see at least a bit around you when you're willing to slow down. But again, it's like running versus chilling the fuck out. It's like as you're running, you never adjust. You never get that sensitivity to what's going on that can then inform at least the next step. At least you got that. At least there's a direction that maybe makes a little bit more sense than another. Still not certain at all, but it just makes a little bit more sense than when you're running around and don't see anything whatsoever, just hearing things, being told things. This is the best direction. Validate this. It's like from someone feeling super shitty, and there's like, just make me feel better by choosing the same thing that I chose and doing the same thing that I did. And yet they're in the spot that, they were hoping not to get into, or suffering, and they're just dragging you with them. It's like the person drowning is going to grab onto someone else despite them just drowning. Anyway. And so anyway, wrap that one up. Settling down allows your eyes to adjust and at least inform, the next step or two. At least you can get a sense of that, a feeling of that. But as long as you're sprinting around, you never gain that sensitivity to what's maybe nearby.
And that's really a big part of it, right? Is gaining clarity. The other part of it is not being influenced by fear and need. And that really is it, because at least then if you stop and you allow your eyes to adjust, but you're still focused on getting what you want or running away from an experience, then you're still going to be biased in how much you're taking in or even what you're willing to look at. And so it really does come down to just being able to identify why you're trying to get anywhere, and not understanding that the forest is the fullness of your experience. The forest is not something that you can get out of. The forest is you. It is your consciousness. It is your experience. It is the ongoing experience of you. And as long as you are trying to get somewhere in order to get out of it or change the experience of it, not only is it difficult to gain any clarity, it's difficult to make any choices that are genuinely yours and not influenced by some fictional fear or some fictional need. And that's the nice thing about clarity, is that when you are coming from a place of self-responsibility, you can do whatever you want. There is no right answer. There is no right path. There is just the ongoing experience of responsible clarity, which means it doesn't matter which way you go in, you're going to make the most of it.
And I think that is a fantastic spot to wrap up this episode. This has been a blast. I really enjoyed feeling the whole episode is kind of the build up for this gummy for me as we were going. And now it's like, oh yeah, definitely feeling it. But it's funny too, because I almost felt it as soon as I ate it, in a sense, because it is just symbolic of relaxation. Like if you're willing to relax, like with so many things, if you're willing to just chill the fuck out for a sec, that's the experience that it's getting you to, or showing you the potential for. And so anyway, this has been a lot of fun, and really enjoyed back and forth.
Absolutely. This has been a lot of fun. What it reminded me of, quite frankly, is a psychedelic trip where you are just hanging out with somebody and shooting the breeze, and it is a non-linear conversation in the extreme. It all revolves around some insight about your own personal being, but there is no direction that it is going in per se. And there is no point to it other than having the conversation, which is why it's so much fun and why you can get so involved with what you're talking about, and hopefully why it was so much fun to listen to. Hi, listener. We are going to wrap up here, but do remember, if you would like to join us for a conversation like this in person, come to one of our mini retreats. We've got one coming up in April 11th to 15th, and we have another one coming up in Virginia Beach from February 1st to February 5th. But yeah, this has been a blast. A free-flowing conversation that was probably one of the most fun that I can remember doing in a long time.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like I don't know. I feel like a lot of our initial conversations episodes very much felt the bouncing around. A lot of it was just my own questions and whatnot. But anyway, now I'm like jumping back into thoughts and whatnot. This has been a blast. Really was a bunch of fun. Appreciate everyone for tuning in. I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Nice.
That was fun.
That was sick.
That was great.
That was a lot of
I
fun.
started that episode. I totally forgot.
Yeah, I know. It weirdly feels like a really long time ago.
Right? Yeah, that was trippy.